Thank you everyone for being here. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday weekend. It's my pleasure to introduce Brian Bockelman, who is an investigator at the Morgridge Institute for Research in Madison, Wisconsin, as well as he helps lead the Center for High Throughput Computing at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Today, he'll be speaking to us about delivering the nation's data with the Open Science Data Federation. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Brian.
Great, thank you, Nicole. So for those of you who can remember the other side of the long weekend, the previous speaker here was Miron Livny talking about various national services that we're involved with. And I don't know if it was quite a fluke of scheduling or we just got lucky, but at some level, this is part two of the talk. So I'll be talking about the Open Science Data Federation or the OSDF, and just to give I've snuck in a couple call outs even to the next talk, which doesn't come from CHTC, but if I was reading the calendar right, the next one is from LK, who will talk about the national data platform. So I've tried to put in a couple hints of how all these things cohere together into one large vision of a national cyber infrastructure instead of coordinated services. But today, the piece of the puzzle we're going to talk about is the OSDF. So before I launch into the topic itself, I want a little bit just about who I am and what the Center for High Throughput Computing does. CHTC is founded as part of the Computer Sciences Department here at UW-Madison. And it turns out one other thing that exists on campus is the Morgridge Institute for Research. So we're a private research institute. And this last couple of weeks, we've been celebrating opening up a brand new building for the Computer Sciences Department. So you can actually get both a picture of both buildings or both half of the center uh, all in one. You have Morgridge Institute on one side and the Morgridge Hall on the other. So even though we're a separate private institute, if you say I'm from the UW-Madison campus, you get it about right. So the Center for High Throughput Computing, I like to emphasize is kind of unique or interesting for a couple of reasons. CHTC itself, of course, the throughput computing in there, it means that we have a focus on technologies and approaches to enable throughput, whether that's automation or large scale or distributed technologies. We're interested in how we can maximize the amount of science we do for a given period of time. And we also serve as the research computing center on campus. And the reason we do that is not because we're bored or that particularly altruistic, but this little diagram in the upper right-hand corner that I'll come back to a couple times through the talk, which is our little mental image of translational computer science. So we feel our research is better when instead of, I like to joke about CS professors that they come up with a great idea, write up the prototype, publish the paper, throw it all the trash can and start again. Um, we like to think of what we do as getting better by having feedback loops, both from the locale, so that's whatever services that we might put up, and the communities that we build around the locale. So for us, we feel our science gets better the more people that use our services and the more feedback from the different users and the communities out there. And in fact, if I look down the participant lists, I see quite a few familiar faces that are part of our user community and help us with these feedback loops. So for us, building, whether it's services here on the campus or nationally or internationally, it's all part of moving our science forward while we're trying to also impact and improve and serve the science of others. So as a setup one angle of what we are interested in doing with the OSDF is if you've never tried to publish a data set, maybe just put on your PI hat and think about what it takes to actually do quality work to curate a scientific data set. Um, there's gathering it, whether it's observational data or simulated. There's the metadata to attach to it and describe what it is and how to use it. And then, there is some aspect of knocking on doors and growing communities, going out to talk folks, going to conferences, advocating for the value and scientific interests of your data set. But especially as data, whether you think of it as becoming larger or more complex, uh, as a researcher, your work's not done quite yet. So you have to think about what tools do you provide for people to use the data? How do you manage access control? Even for open data, there might be some privacy concerns. There might be wanting to understand your user base. You want to think about how you manage access control. People, and again, going back to when the data sets sizes get larger, will want to use that for computation. And NSF has wonderful computational resources they fund, but often it's not at the same place as the data repositories. And then finally, how do you even provide scalable access? The one thing and all that we do that's nice and scalable is S3. But unfortunately, the cost scales with it, and users don't tend to love it when you charge them for the cost of the access. So there's real work in managing scientific data beyond just creating it. These are real skill sets you have to know, and it's a lot of effort. So we've all seen a couple approaches as you get out there. And one of them is just to tell users it's their problem, right? So you decide that you've created the data set, you put on the metadata, you slapped it on the university website, put it on your homepage, write a blog post about it, and the rest is the user's problem, right? They get to figure out how to compute on the data. They figure out how to download the data, maybe how to write the curl scripts to scrape the websites and where to put things. And oh, by the way, when you reprocess or create a version 2 or version 3, they have to figure out how to get the updates, where to compute all these things. And just, it is fair and reasonable just to say I push this off into the user. And of course, life is full of trade-offs, and the trade-off there is the higher the friction is to use, the smaller impact for your data. On the flip side, uh, if you put on your PI or researcher hat on, you can say, well, I really want to grow my community. I think I'll do this. So you can build tools to distribute the data. You can build platforms or think of them as scientific gateways for computing on the data set or to do popular activities on it. Build your own authentication authorization solution, build. And the problem on this side of the pendulum swing is at some point you actually have to find the time and resources to do the science. Uh, a lot of folks can do all these pieces, but it takes an enormous amount of effort. So those are the two sides of the pendulum. Where can we meet in the middle? And one option is to leverage the NSF ecosystem. So we don't live all by ourselves off an island, but NSF funds a great number of services, particularly out of the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure, to tackle different problems of the face space. So I'll be talking about today how we can help stream your data as part of the OSDF. NSF funds services to catalog and publish data sets. So I'll be giving a couple shout outs to the National Data Platform. NSF funds computing platforms to explore, analyze, and visualize the data. So the prior talk, in fact, the prior working day before this one, Miron talked about the OS pool, and I think it was in July, Frank was here to talk about the National Research Platform. And there are service platforms like the NRP that can provide unique capabilities specific to your data set and building out the community without going to the foundation. So the goal here is you build the community, you provide the value, but you don't have to do it all by yourself down to the bare operating system. So what is the OSDF? So one simple way of starting it, particularly for maybe non-technical crowds, is saying that the OSDF is trying to be Netflix for science. We're interested in, can we stream data to computational workflows, and at some level for users with a user-facing view, uh, can we have it be as easy as Netflix? I like to point out nobody needs a training manual to use Netflix. We don't host tutorials at PERC on how to use Netflix. It's a fairly straightforward interface, fairly common integrations across, well, their case, different smart TVs and whatnot. And users know that as soon as they find the data that they're interested in, they can click play and start working on it. And the question here is, can we build up a similar approach for the scientific community? Another way to think about it, which might be a little more honest or a little closer to what the OSDF does, is Cloudflare, but for science. For those of you who aren't familiar with Cloudflare, they're a content distribution network where you take your web server, your storage, your application, connect it to their network, and they take care of some of the things like scaling. And for Cloudflare, they're truly on a global scale. And the question is, can we do this for science where instead of being interested in being next to the population centers, for us, the population centers might be the R&E networks of the globe, particularly of the US, and different large computational infrastructures that the federal government has invested in. So particularly because we don't actually have much staging space within the OSDF, maybe this Cloudflare analogy is the closest one to what we do. And again, I'll emphasize this a couple of times, but the OSDF is part of a suite of services. While it can be used on its own, it's maybe best leveraged as part of the OSG fabric of services, along with the OS pool and facilitation effort that Maroon mentioned on Friday. And maybe it's just because I don't like acronyms, or maybe I do like birds, in the same way that the OS pool service is built on the Condor software. The OSDF service that we use to deliver data nationally, internationally, is built on the Pelican platform. And I'm the PI of the Pelican platforms project, which is also funded through NSF. So again, on top of these two different foundations of software, we are interested in serving these national and international communities. So it's operated by the Path Project. So that is one thing that's a little unique compared to the Condor and the OS pool, is that the software and the operations are split between two distinct but cooperative and collaborative projects. And because we are interested in providing connectivity across the US and the globe, we're leveraging hardware from further projects yet. So we have maybe the slight majority of our presence in terms of hardware built on top of the National Research Platform, but there's also strong investments from Internet 2, from ESNet, and contributions from around the globe. So the National Research Platform provides a distributed Kubernetes cluster that they refer to as Nautilus. So when we are operating these caches, they might live in a internet 2 point of presence. They might live in a data center at a university, but we see them as one part of one big Kubernetes cluster deployment. So here on this is the map of various NRP sites where the little green disk icons are places where we have a OSD exclusive hardware as part of their distributed Kubernetes. Just to give a feel for what's at these kind of, I think of these as the regional caches that complement a number of site level caches. Typical hardware is about 100 gigabit of connectivity, and maybe the median is 20 terabytes of NVMe, with the newer deployments kind of going 50 to 50 plus. So this allows us to manage and create copies, stage copies of different interesting scientific data sets or container images or input files. It's a wide variety of use cases within the network, and that serves really two different benefits. It does allow scale out, so we have 30 copies on very high performing hardware. We can serve out many more clients than we otherwise probably could with just a single university's repository. But it also gives us point of managing. So sometimes I think even the managing part is more important than scaling out. You know, the ability to mitigate the impacts of what I refer to as the enthusiastic grad student who just found 10,000 cores in their basement. So sometimes saying no and providing circuit breakers is even better than being able to provide infinite scalability. So in terms of connecting to this global infrastructure and global service, uh, eventually all the data lives as objects in an object store. So this is run by the repository. It's run by the site that holds the data. Even though we refer to this as an object store, which is very evocative of S3 instance, there's a number of backends that we can actually support. We got started with all this with just honest to goodness plain old mounted file systems, added S3 and HTTP web service support, and the newest backend is a Globus collection. So we actually, this doesn't necessarily have to be a literal spinning disk, but it can be another service that is a backend that provides the objects. Um, Connected to that object store is the origin service. So this implements the access control policy and then actually proxies the data between that and the rest of the service. And this service is the one that really is the one necessary piece to interact and branch between kind of the language of the OSDF and whatever your local object store might speak. I'll give a couple examples of this and how people have used or connected to the OSDF. Sometimes this origin can live locally on campus, sitting on next to the object store, particularly true if, say, this is a mounted file system, but it can also live outside campus in a nearby Internet 2 POP or a local science DMZ. And kind of give a small example of how the data flows from the client point of view. So the prior slide was maybe more focused on the origin. Consider this small setup that is maybe the limit of my PowerPoint animation abilities. Actually, Miron did a lot of the work on this particular slide. So this is an example from one of our collaborators at NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, who's been working to author notebooks to get their community to be more focused on streaming data, especially as they have fairly large data sets as opposed to downloading data each time. So our collaborator, Harsha, has a particular graph he wants to make where he's taking some global simulation data sets that live at NCAR, and he's taking some historical data sets that live in AWS. And he wants through one notebook to be able to access both of them independent or both of them simultaneously as part of the same workflow and eventually produce one graph that going backwards has historical data and then going forwards has the outputs of simulation. So he knows the names of the objects he's interested in, both in AWS and at NCAR. And here I overlay on the different parts of the OSDF. This brings it all into one single hierarchical namespace. And we'll be using the client software. Remember, Pelican's the client. So we'll use the Pelican client to access and locate the data through the OSDF. So first, the Pelican client is invoked to get data that's part of the NCAR piece of the namespace. So the client has to reach out to the central service, the director, to understand what service, what cache in this case, can service the request for some NCAR data. So the client then goes to the cache and says, here's a particular object I'm interested in. The cache, as you might guess, will look around and say, I don't have this object currently. And then itself have to go to the director to learn what part of the namespace can actually, or what origin services that part of the namespace. So that prefix, that ncar in the unified namespace, is kind of used as a routing key, as maybe the network to connect to. And that way the cache can find what origin can access ncar's data. And the origin knows how to translate to a request to ncar's object store, and the data goes through the origin, made a copy at the cache, and gets delivered to the notebook. In this case, it actually goes into a NumPy array. So this is actually storing it in memory within the notebook. Then for the other half of Harsha's graph, he does the exact same thing, except this time it starts querying for data that's within AWS Open Data. And you can see that after both of these GET requests have completed, we'll have a copy in the cache for subsequent usage. So Harsha's beautiful Python code then takes those things, puts them together, and of course, produces some sort of output plot. So I mentioned that objects are pulled from the cache or the GET. And if you've ever looked under the hood of HTTP, that's a HTTP verb. And indeed, Pelican uses HTTP to move all the bytes. So any operation we're doing can also while you can use the Pelican client, it has all sorts of helpers for managing authorization, retry policy, and understanding a couple extensions. The simplest client for Pelican can also just be a browser, or it can be curl. And they just maybe miss some of the more elaborate retry or authorization policies. So if you're well versed in HTTP, a download is a get, upload is a put. These are all the same exact verbs and protocol that we use for Pelican within the OSDF. So this is an example of a HTTP request to the central director. Again, since the director doesn't serve the data but selects a cache for the data, the director is going to respond with something that looks like this. This is a pretty common internal response from HTTP. Here are all these things that I highlight in blue are 100% standard HTTP headers recognized by any HTTP client in the world. And then we use some maybe less common RFCs or have a couple internal headers that we use to hint at what authorization might be needed or how to find the appropriate token to access or credential to access the file. So popping out of the details of how the guts of the service works, if I think about how this interacts and works with different services around the community, this is my mental image. So we all always start with some object store where there's the copy of the data that we want to make accessible, whether it's a dataset repository and archive, it could be an S3 instance, it could be an object store associated with an access point on the OS pool for a computational service like we talked about last time, or this other service called the OS store, which I'll get to in a couple slides. All this storage is connected to this delivery layer, which may make transient copies, short-lived copies for scalability purposes of the objects, and then delivered out to different consumers, whether it's the OS pool, particularly for throughput computing users and scale, whether it's the NDP pilot or a Jupyter instance for visualization or cataloging, or just very simply browser downloads and scaling out data access. So how do different people leverage the OSDF then? So I keep trying to draw the storage separately to emphasize the OSDF is not just some disk-based server in the cloud. It's not a free version of S3 because the OSDF itself doesn't provide anybody with storage. So what does the community use the service for? So they use it to stream data, maybe to save money on egress costs for S3. Maybe they use it to implement authorization policy that saves projects time and effort to have to reinvent their own. It does track usage data. So maybe that saves your PI some time where instead of having to do this all yourself, they can leverage some of the simple accounting data we have within the OSDF. And it allows users to use NSF computing services and computing capacity at scale, which hopefully will grow your community. All right, so what are some example recipes? So one highlight is NCAR. So this is the National Center for Atmospheric Resource. And they have, as part of their Research Data Archive, or RDA, a fairly large on-prem S3 instance with just petabytes of public data sets, and it wants to distribute them out to a large community. Some of these are observational data that NCAR's different labs have recorded over the years and deposited into the Common Archive. Sometimes it's outputs of simulations. So NCAR has a big, I guess you'd call it a traditional supercomputer, and that computer will put out petabytes of ensembles of future climate forecasts that different researchers in the community want to leverage. And particularly internally, one of the things they want to do is get out of the business of having everybody to have an NCAR account. So they want to be more open and welcoming to communities that may not necessarily have access to the local NCAR compute and can just open the file in the shared file system. And they also want to get people out of the business of downloading full data sets and then using very small subsets of the data set. So if you're interested in one geographic region or one or two variables, you shouldn't need to lug a petabyte scale data set to access a couple hundred gigabytes. So they were looking for a way to really transition the community to a more streaming based model. So the way we approach the integration with NCAR is path deploy to origin service. Remember, these don't necessarily have to be co-located. We put them nearby, and we pointed that on at NCAR's on-prem S3 instance. All their objects in the bucket of interest are exported to OSDF via that origin. So it, again, kind of acts as a proxy for the data. For a lot of what they do, they have either internal catalogs or people just browsing their online portal. So they updated their online portal code to provide just direct HTTP download links. So a lot of these cases, particularly once we had them integrated, we started seeing lots of wonderful traffic from Googlebot. And then they've been teaching and educating their community through sample notebooks. They have a really cool thing called Project Pythia, which provides online tutorials of how to use data. And they use this, they have been updating that to use the Pelican Python client instead of assuming locally downloaded data. So they've been going on a tutorial and education to less about how to use the Pelican client, but more about using these concepts of streaming and downloading for their community. So as a positive example, now collaborators that they have in Korea can leverage the local cache in Korea instead of streaming data from across the planet, which probably wouldn't have turned out fairly well for them. So this is a little picture of the NCAR setup. So the OSDF cache service on the MIS, again, will just issue HTTP GET. This is public data, so we actually don't require credentials other than that. And in this particular implementation, the origin service is actually operated by path, but the physical host is within the NCAR's Science DMZ. Although I could have just as easily moved that box outside if I had wanted. So to give another twist on this, to get the imagination going, what happens if NCAR's data didn't live on the on-prem S3, but actually lived in AWS S3? In fact, this is a lot of large federal repositories do exactly that. And in that case, streaming publicly get pretty expensive. That they can really run out of their egress allocations, and so one thing that we're working on is at that origin where I said we proxy the data, take advantage of the fact that objects are immutable, and we can attach some large, maybe slow storage to it, and that way data egresses once. We make a copy of that on outside AWS, and then we can hopefully save on reuse some of the cost of egress or AWS egress, but then still leverage the reliability and uptime of Amazon. So in that particular case, this is maybe what the configuration would look like. Here we've moved the origin service to a different physical location and attached a disk to it that is going to make a copy on first use. We'll still use all the high performing fast NVMe at the caches for scaling out, and then leverage that we can make a fairly inexpensive copy here to avoid those egress charges as you move between the boxes. So a second case has been a particular PI at Kennesaw State University who had a single data set called Flamingo Stem located on a shared file system at his university that he wanted to share with his collaborators. So again, to connect to the OSDF, we host a origin service. The PI told us who their collaborators were, and via their institutional single sign-on. So this was some internal institutional users and some external collaborators. So we leveraged CI logon to federate authorization. That allowed the Ramazan to know who was accessing their data and to manage, tell us who could read it. And then Ramazan knows the names of all the objects he shared in his data set and hands his collaborators OSDF objects names and teaches them, in their case, they've mostly just been downloading through the CLI, how to download the files located at Kennesaw. So in this particular case, the thing that got added, well, one difference is this is a POSIX read. So this is a locally mounted file system on the origin. And then the arrow I added to the picture is the client has to some way get a credential. So the client, by querying that central director service, knows a credential is needed, knows that it has to go to this particular origin to request a credential. And that origin, here's where I didn't draw it, will redirect to the institutional, well, to CI logon and then to the institutional single sign-on. So we can know that somebody authenticated according to policy, and then subsequently a credential goes back to the client, which allows them to access whether it's a copy in the cache or to trigger a download from the origin again. So in this particular case, we're reflecting out the owner, the object store's authorization policy into the OSDF. And so I see there's a great question from Hassan. I don't cover it in these slides, but he asked in the chat, basically, how does this work with sensitive or restricted data? So right now we're really focusing on what I'd call open science data. So non-restricted data. It doesn't need to be public. It could be like this particular case where uh, the owner of the data wants to tightly control who has access to it. But this is a system, right? The O is for open, where it's really not meant to to be at the level of HIPAA type requirements. So the one thing that we've been working out, roll out, and it's actually available now is CI Logon can also do some group management. And so while we originally set this up last year with Ramazan, currently any new use cases are all self-service. And we're working as part of the next couple releases to provide more fine-grained access so people can do more self-service towards publishing larger numbers of data sets. So whether you're in the case like Ramazan at Kennesaw, or you're the case of NCAR and a portal, there's a number of different ways to do that integration. You can actually combine both the authorization piece and the web-based downloads via embedding the credentials in URL, a bit like how S3 does its pre-signed URLs. And these are the sorts of integrations that we love to see and that we'd love to talk to folks about because we think that can enable even wider set of authorization policies besides the simple ones that are built into the software. So I promised to talk at least a little bit about the OS store. So in all these cases that I've mentioned up to this point, the OSDF is connected to a data repository, which implies that the data lives somewhere that it can connect to. So what happens if you don't own your own repository? What if your IT staff is really overwhelmed or busy? What if you don't have any IT staff really to support you? Maybe you're at a smaller lab or university where this is maybe just challenging environments to get started in. So through the support of NSF CC STAR program, we manage the space of about a half dozen to a dozen different storage awards. So as a part of condition of the award, these different universities have handed over about 20% of their system. It's always interesting to see how you define 20% of a system, but they've handed over about 20% typically of the space, which works out to be about a petabyte per site to the Path project to manage for other national level projects. So if you don't have a repository that you can access, you can get some space allocated out of the OS store and um, host what I call a time and space limited copy of your data. So these are really not intended for archival. They're great for data sets that you may have, whether it's a AWS Glacier hard drive on the shelf, or you know that if they get lost by this other hosting site, that you can just maybe recompute or reprocess the data. But this does allow you to make things available and even at large scale. So we do have users that have leveraged this at the range of a couple hundred of terabytes for their scientific data sets. All right, so those are the people that have connected to the OSDF. How do the users and their communities actually benefit from it? Well, one is giving them the gift of compute. So one of the goals of the OSDF is to enable things like throughput computing as part of the OSG fabric of services. Uh, and you know, a typical day, actually 600K jobs is often a slow day. Busy days on the OS pool can be about a million jobs a day. Uh, so this allows the OSCF allows people to scale out and leverage throughput computing through the OS pool or other similarly operated pools like Miron was talking about on Friday. We watch this usage pretty closely. This is an example of our overnight emails that sum up the prior day on the OSDF. This was over the Labor Day weekend, so this was kind of a slow one, but we watch how many different accesses there are, how many times maybe it's a user's fault if it fails. Say, for example, they have a typo in the name versus uh, the infrastructure's fault. How many times things succeed with retries, you know, so on and so forth. So our goal is to try to run closely as much as we can within an academic environment, provide a real production grade infrastructure. Uh, Other example, so here's again last Thursday and Friday, if I remember, some example rates of what I thought was a fairly busy day. So the graphs on the left are from whatever origins that were active to the caches. So you see that here at the very top of the graph is about half a gigabit, about 500 megabits a second. And then on the right side is the rate from the cache to different clients, whether at UW-Madison or within the region. And you can see that, you know, even just looking at the labels here, this is about where 100 gigabits is versus half a gigabit. So, you know, in this case, for some of the very popular objects in the Federation, we're seeing about more than a factor of 200 reduction in overall traffic that went out to the origin from the cache. So this really can scale out to some of the largest computing workloads if needed. People use the OSDF to visualize. So again, going back to some of these examples from NCAR, fairly popular working environment tends to be Jupyter, and people can use the Jupyter notebooks. And they're, again, Project Pythia has some really cool examples that we've been working on for the OSDF. And the Pelican Python client library supports fairly popular Python storage APIs, which then allows you to use, maybe I'd call it the data science ecosystem. Think pandas, Xarray, Zar, PyTorch. So different machine learning frameworks or scientific frameworks to access subsets of the data. Um, so uh, Another example here is we've been working with the SciViz conference, and they have a 400 terabyte data set that they're using for their visualization contest for the 2026 interest that is all accessible through the OSDF. And then finally, people just use it to download from the browser. This was going back to the in-car case. Here, that's the point, I'll pay them enough to put our logo on it, but anytime you go to their research data archive and you click on the web server web links, uh, you can just download and get redirected through your browser uh, the objects from NCAR via the OSDF. Uh, and the in-car integration has been going on for, or has been active since about May. And again, our collaborator Harsha has been helping people not only understand that this exists and can be leveraged, but also developing various notebooks showing environments like Jupyter Lab, or maybe on your laptop, or OS Pool, or Dask. So the goal again is to, for this particular community, to invest in streaming subsets of the data sets that they're interested in. And then OSDF is used other ways. LIGO, I think I spot a couple LIGO friendly faces on the participant list here. Over the course of 2024, they moved 27 petabytes of objects, which is about 200 terabytes of unique data. Um, and as far as I could tell, that's going to be much even larger for once the 2025 numbers. So LIGO might be one of the largest single scientific collaborations that heavily uses the OSDF. But we also have individual uh, single PI groups like Ramazan I mentioned before, or this case, it's Kurt Dodd's talk here. This was for HTC 25, where he has single simulation data sets that he's made available from University of Hawaii. All right, so what's next? So if you found any of this interesting, well, you can either Google OSDF, of course, but uh, one of the highlights I'd suggest is looking at our OSDF data page. So here we've curated a couple of the integrations that have been done with the OSDF. So here, the one I got the screenshot of is the route views data set. So this is fairly well known for network researchers. It's a pretty cool data set historically that goes back decades, snapshots of the routing tables of the global internet. So if you're ever interested in the time evolution of the internet topology, you can download that all through the OSDF. And this particular page shows whether it's route views or Dune or NCAR or LIGO, has some different ways that people leverage the service. So you can get inspired that way. The next talk in the CI Compass series is from the PI of the National Data Platform, okay. And NDP builds on top of the OSDF in the same way that the OS pool does to provide different services around data sets or shells around different communities. So that can mean building Jupyter-based notebooks or cookbooks, building a catalog of the published data sets. So we know what objects can be accessed through the OSDF, but as part of the OSDF, we don't do any cataloging ourselves. It can be used, NDP can use to generate metadata and attach it to the data sets. It's been used for teaching courses and even providing bespoke kind of data set specific computational services. So I'll leave any more said to Ilke coming up. I think that was September 22nd. But it's a kind of example of kind of a more further off service than the OS pool that's been able to integrate and leverage the OSDF. And then finally, just a reminder to go back to my first slide, the way our center operates is through the use of translational computer science. So for us, things like Pelican is the laboratory, right? That's where we come up with ideas. How do we manage data better? How do we understand? How do we scale out? How do we provide policies to make multi-tenant caching actually function a little bit better? Or this year we'll have a lot of focus on staging capabilities. These technologies get deployed out to locales or services such as the OSDF, which grow and operate on the order of maybe 5 to 10 years. And hopefully we build out communities where the services enable science and really build those out over the course of careers and decade plus. So all that is to say, working with you out here in the real world is how we get our research done. So we need a locale, we need to partner with folks and understand through your feedback how we can make our services better. So if you're interested, please reach out to support at oschtc.org, and I'll make sure that we get the slides posted if you have any particular questions. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Please, everybody, help me thank our speaker, Brian. And as he mentioned, we'll have our next webinar on September 22nd. So hope to have you all there. Thank you very much, Brian.